Hi everyone. I hope you've been enjoying the conference and London so far. My name is Ute Mons from University of Cologne, and it's my pleasure and my honor to announce the second keynote lecture of this conference, which will be given by R.Talhout. Reinske is a senior scientific advisor at RIVM, which is the National Institute for Public Health and the Environment in the Netherlands, where she heads the WHO Collaborating Center for Tobacco Product Regulation and Control. She has a background in chemistry and, interestingly, just learned that from your bio, also in the philosophy of science. And she received her PhD in physical organic chemistry in 2003 from the University of Groningen. Reinske truly is a pioneer in tobacco product regulatory science. She has worked in the field for nearly 20 years now. And also the WHO Collaborating Center has been established in 2007, so also more than 50 years ago. I'm not saying this to imply that you're old, but just because you've been working in this field for so long and have during this time really published numerous peer-reviewed articles, reports, book chapters on the attractive, addictive, and toxic properties of tobacco and related products. And particularly noteworthy is the recent work you did on e-cigarette flavors, aiming at systematically classifying e-cigarette flavors and flavor descriptions, and at shedding light on their role in product attractiveness. But also beyond these research contributions, Reinske also regularly provides scientific advice to the Dutch government, also to the European Commission on tobacco product regulation. And as head of the WHO Collaborating Center for Tobacco Product Regulation and Control, which is also one of the leading labs in Top LabNet, which is a global network of laboratories that provides scientific and technical support to WHO and its member states. She also significantly contributes to developing and sharing standards for product testing, and hence also supports the implementation of the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And all these accomplishments have also been recently recognized by WHO by awarding her World No Tobacco Day Award. And I quote from the justification for the award, Dr. Talhout's research has been instrumental in illuminating the role of flavor descriptions and other sensory factors in the attractiveness of novel tobacco and nicotine products, as well as contributing to a better understanding of the challenges faced by smokers trying to quit. But what I find particularly remarkable about Reinske is that her research always addresses very urgent issues, both from scientific but also from a political regulatory point of view. And yet, I very much appreciate that her stance, even on controversial topics, is always evidence-based and balanced, and relying on rigorous scientific methods to provide the best evidence possible. So it's a real pleasure to have you here today to give a keynote lecture about the health effects of new tobacco and nicotine products. Just one final note, due to a tight schedule, we unfortunately can't take questions after the lecture, but we will have a coffee break after that. So if you have questions, please don't hesitate to approach her directly. I'm sure she'll be happy to answer your questions. And yeah, Reinske, I'm very excited for your talk, so let's all give her a warm welcome. And the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mons, for this very kind introduction. I really appreciate it. Can you hear me well? Also in the back? Good. That's one less concern. So, indeed, my talk of today will be on the health effects of new nicotine and tobacco products, especially what we can learn from their attractive, addictive, and toxic effects. And the aim of answering these questions is, of course, to have some idea about their long-term impact and population level. So another more thought-provocative question I ask today is, will we ever be able to predict their long-term impact on population level? I can already say that I think the answer is no, but we can come a long way with studying attractiveness, addictiveness, and toxicity. So you already heard about this. I just want to add that I have no conflicts of interest to declare. Well, when we discuss the newer types of nicotine and tobacco products, it's very important first to study some developments in cigarette regulation and also the more classical tobacco products. So in Western Europe, at least in most countries, the cigarette is still the most popular tobacco product. And over the years, due to increased tobacco control, they have become more and more strict regulated. For example, regarding excise tax, regarding warnings, regarding package size, and also regarding flavors. Since 2016, cigarettes and roll your own in Europe cannot have characterizing flavors other than tobacco anymore. And since 2020, also no menthol flavors. Other products are often exempted from this type of regulation, meaning that there's a difference between cigarettes and other type of products. A second development over the last many decades is increased health concerns of smokers. Granted, knowledge among some groups is still low, but I think most smokers realize that smoking is bad for their health and may want to quit, sometimes can't, and are looking for other types of tobacco products, of which it's also important that they understand the risks. And all of this taken together has led to a lower smoking prevalence, but also maybe room for other type of products. And of course, industry plays a role. As any industry, tobacco and nicotine industry wants to stay in business and wants to sell their products. That's not unique to this type of industry, but it is more of a concern as these are toxic products. And here is a quote I found very interesting. It's already from 1973, but I think it's still valid. It says, realistically, if our company is to survive and prosper over the long term, we must get our share of the youth market. And this, of course, is very true, as most people start using nicotine and tobacco before the age of 18. I think almost 90%. So it's important to also look at this specific target group. So here are some examples of recent new, between brackets, I will come back to that in the next slide, nicotine and tobacco products. After an introduction, I will walk you through 3 cases that show some aspects of assessing attractiveness, addictiveness, and toxicity. First of all, electronic nicotine delivery systems, then heated tobacco products, and finally oral nicotine products, in particular heated tobacco products. So when those products come on the market, we don't have any epidemiological data, so we don't know their long-term effects. But regulators need to regulate them, so we must have some idea about these products. And here it can help to study attractiveness, addictiveness, and toxicity. And for toxicity, we should also be very careful that we don't fall in the trap that we only study smoking-related diseases, but also keep an eye open for novel types of toxicity. Yes. So as said, we often call them new products, but some of them are not quite that new anymore. For example, the e-cigarette has been introduced in 2007 already, and many of you may think that heated tobacco products were introduced, well, around 2014, most notably the IQOS of Philip Morris. But actually, by the end of the 80s, many different types of heated tobacco products were put on the market, but they failed in the market. They were just not considered sufficiently attractive, especially their taste was not considered quite well. But circumstances changed, product innovation has gone on, so now there's some more room, some 10 years ago, to reintroduce them. Anyway, so some products not so new anymore, so we start to learn more and more. Also related to studying this field is one's stance and the stance of one's country, one's policymakers, everything about what one wants to reach with tobacco control. Are we aiming for a smoke-free world, a tobacco-free world, or maybe country, because this is what we have influence on, or a nicotine-free world? As we've seen also over the past days, that does influence discussions. We scientists are of course objective, but we are also people, and we know since Bruno Latour that scientists, like any other people, are influenced by their surroundings. So it does make a difference in what environment one is. Yeah, like this. So for example, WHO is striving for a tobacco-free world, but nicotine products are not covered yet by the Framework Convention, so I think ideally they would also strive for a nicotine-free world. In my own country, the Netherlands, the aim is a smoke-free generation in 2040. So 0% of young people smoking, 0% of pregnant people smoking, and just 5% of the general population. But by smoke-free world, we certainly do not mean what Philip Morris means by that. Our government considers heated tobacco products not to be a good step forward in reaching a smoke-free generation. And neither are e-cigarettes, as we will see later in the talk. So that's their main policy aim, to protect young people and reach a smoke-free generation. An interesting question with all these new products is if in the space of attractiveness, addictiveness and toxicity there's a so-called sweet spot. This is a publication from Abrams et al., some 5 years old, and I thought it was quite interesting. So their idea is that they populated this product space with many types of products. Here, for example, are the nicotine replacement products, not so toxic, but also not so attractive and addictive. Unfortunately, on the top right side, there are the combustible products, and as you know, cigarettes are the most often used. So not only are they probably the most toxic, but also most appealing and addictive. And now their thinking is, their proposal in this article is that there is a so-called sweet spot of products that are not so toxic. I think we shouldn't take this toxicity value literally, but it's just to make the point that there are products that are less toxic and also attractive and addictive. And they say, well, it's necessary that these products are addictive and attractive because they need to compete with combustible products in order to move smokers away from using the most toxic form. On the other hand, if the product is appealing and addictive, this will probably also be the case for non-smokers. And the idea is also that proposed in this article that we need to move away smokers away from using the most harmful to a less harmful product, while keeping people that do not use such products in the most harmless state. And this is, of course, a dilemma. How can you reach both aims at the same time? Making products that are less toxic attractive for smokers, while not making them attractive for young smokers. So that's quite a puzzle. So when such new products on the market, there are many different questions to answer. And as I said, we don't have any epidemiological data yet, so we need to do that via other ways. One important question is, of course, what about their toxicity? In absolute sense, so as compared to using nothing, but also what is their relative harm to a comparator product. In most cases, here, cigarettes are used as the most often used product, so that we can also know what it would mean for a smoker to switch. Then there are many questions about a target group and the attractiveness and addictiveness for those specific target groups. Broadly speaking, we have non-smokers and smokers, although there are also other options, of course. And for non-smokers, main questions are, do these new products attract youth? And will youth get addicted to the new product? And will it lead them to smoking, so the so-called gateway effect? For smokers, important questions are, do these products actually help smokers to quit tobacco smoking, or do they inhibit cessation? And final important question is, how about dual use? Dual use could be accepted if it's only for a short period when people transition, but if it's a continuous state, then of course this is an issue, because then you don't have an alternative, but an addition to the already existing problem. So many broad but important questions to answer when you assess such products. Now, in order to shed some light in this puzzle, at RIVM years ago we tried to make a conceptual model to relate attractiveness, addictiveness and toxicity to health risks. So health risks, of course, are caused by the toxicity of a product, but also the exposure. Now, toxicity is directly related to emissions of the product, whereas attractiveness and addictiveness have an effect on user behavior. So two arms of the same problem. So they are all equally important to study, I would say. When we dive into that a little bit deeper, starting with attractiveness, we first need to be aware that attractiveness is not a concept that's the same for the entire population. Strictly speaking, it's just for a single user, but one can also look at groups of users. And attractiveness determining factors can be split in two types, one of them related to the product, others related to the situation. When we start with the product, sensory properties are of importance. So the taste and smell of the product, but also other factors such as harshness, mildness and throat hit. Flavor availability and variety, very important determinants. This is the reasons why characterizing flavor have been forbidden in many jurisdictions. Nicotine content, obviously. Design of the product, so not only aesthetically, but also regarding the functionality and the ease of use. The design of the pack, so again, looks, but also aspects such as health warnings. Price, unfortunately, often the only button that regulators seem to be able to find when regulating the product, but keeping that aside, it's a very important one. And health effects, actual health effect, but also perceived health effects. Regarding situation, there are factors such as accessibility, so points of sales, age restriction and restrictions on use. Marketing and advertising, so health claims made for the product, and also social media get a larger role in this area. Public information such as government communication, but also media articles. And the social network. How do one's peer feel about it? And also what is said about it on the social media. So all these factors determine how attractive a product can be. So some of these can already be scored once the product is on the market, just by looking at it and assessing some aspects of that. So basically, attractiveness is all factors that stimulate the start and continuation of use. Moving on to addictiveness and toxicity. On the left-hand side, you see addictiveness. Here, quite important is obviously the presence of nicotine in the product itself, but also in emissions, the nicotine concentration, and its form. We already heard about this in, I believe, several sessions. Nicotine salts make it easier to inhale nicotine, especially when it's present in large amounts. So nicotine salt is a protonated nicotine, free base is unprotonated. One can also assess that chemically, and so it has an effect on ease of inhalation and therefore ease of use, especially for novel users who are not acquainted yet with the throat hit. Route and rate of delivery. Oral products, if at the same nicotine concentration, don't give the fast kick as inhaled products do. And finally, the presence of other addictiveness enhancing compounds. For example, other minor tobacco alkaloids, but also compounds that are monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Those work together with nicotine and also lead to a higher addictive potential. So again, some aspects that one can already score beforehand, just based on the product. Toxicity. Easy to test once you know the chemical analysis, so not that easy because you do need to know the profile. So first of all, CMR properties. So is a compound carcinogenic, mutagenic, or does it have reprotoxic properties? These are not safe at any level. For other type of hazardous compounds, it's important to know that they are there, but it's also important to know whether they are above a threshold after which they get a harmful effect. Now, regarding health risk assessment, we made a review of that because there are several ways to assess the harmful health effects of a product based on either the composition of a product or exposure to whole smoke. It's quite challenging because even in a specific product class, there can be quite different types of products. So for example, it's almost impossible to talk about the e-cigarette. There's quite a broadness in health effects of a specific product class. Also, it is often quite a complex mixture. When you know that a mixture toxicity, already a mixture of 3 compounds, is a large puzzle when it comes to additive and synergistic effects, let alone a mixture of more than 6,000 known components that is cigarette smoke. So that is quite difficult to assess their harmful effects. And then finally, there's a variety of user behavior. First of all, how many items do people use per day, but also how do they use them? For inhaled products, it's important to know their puffing profile, as this also determines their amount of exposure. Now, and I said you can assess the effects based on the effects of the complete mixture, so as exposing cells or animals or people to whole smoke, but also look at the effects of individual components and adding these effects together. I will give some examples of several of these approaches later in the cases I will discuss. Before I go to that, just a brief summary of the type of research we do at RIVM. I believe that to answer such questions, you need to use several disciplines, and you need all the pieces of the puzzle in order to give a good answer. So first of all, of course, it's important to stay aware of products on the market. So we set up an infoveyance approach, systematically screening several sources of the internet for new type of products and developments in products. So this can help to have an early signal when a new product is on the market, and also about the sentiments on social media. A second useful source here is the EU Common Entry Gate system. That's a legal obligation for manufacturers in the EU. They need to send at least 6 months before they intend to put it on the market, data to the national regulator of a member state on those novel products, their composition, etc. Many different types of data. And of course, surveys are also a possibility. Next, you need to know more about the use of the products. So not only the mode of use, as I just described, for example, the puffing profile, but also reasons for use and risk perception can be quite informative in order to have some idea whether a product will be taken up and by whom. Regarding sensory studies, for example, hedonic studies can be quite insightful. You can ask people how much they like a particular product, and this will also be quite helpful. And finally, of course, biomarkers of exposure and effect will be quite interesting. You also need to know the composition of a product. Now, we have several analytical chemical methods to assess that. And again, here, the EU Common Entry Gate data are also very helpful. Always be careful about the source of that, but if you look at trends, it can be helpful to have such data available. Now, then risk assessment based on use and composition, and also toxicity and addiction test can be helpful here. And as at RIVM we are not the University of Beeldhoven, but rather a public health institute, we also have some tasks, to give policy advice and communicate to the general public about our findings. Moving on to the first case. So first of all, we will discuss e-cigarettes. This is already a little bit an older picture, but you can immediately see that there are so many different types of e-cigarettes available, and also that they come in many different flavors. So it's quite a broad product class. When the products had been on the market for some time, we were asked to do a risk assessment based on the composition of the product. So that was a so-called margin of exposure assessment, where you look at toxicological data about a certain level that could still be without harm, about the actual exposure, and look at the margin between those two. If this is too small, the compound in those levels will be potentially harmful. And of course, you also need to develop a model for the specific type of exposure that is inhalation, puff-wise inhalation. So doing this, coupling our chemical analytical data to toxicological endpoints, we found that e-cigarette vapor contains several ingredients and impurities that can have health damages. In particular, at concentrations that can be detrimental to health, in particular regarding respiratory tract effects, palpitations, and an increased risk of developing cancer. And we also qualitatively assessed that these health effects are less severe than those associated with smoking. Note that this is already almost 10 years ago. Since then, we have learned a lot more. Another way to look at that is by carrying out in vitro tests. They can learn you a lot about mechanisms that eventually may lead to diseases. So here is one example. We coupled two in vitro systems. One is an air-liquid interface where we expose alveolar cells. So this is a model for exposing human airways. The second in vitro test was rat primary cortical cultures exposed. So this is a model of effects on the brain. When we exposed those to e-cigarette vapor, we we made our own research liquids that contained nicotine and menthol or vanillin. We used a smoking machine to expose the cells, so we also simulated the puffing behavior of an actual user. And what we found then was in the air liquid cultured cells that they produce cytokines more than in the control, which is a marker of inflammation. And in the cortical structure cells, we found changes in spontaneous electrical activity, which is neuromodulation and a first sign of neurotoxicity. So such models, in vitro models, can learn you something about mechanisms related to disease, but of course, that's not yet the disease itself, and there's always the question of translating this to humans. But it's an easy test. You can use it for screening, so it can be a first sign that there's a problem associated with a specific product. And of course, you can also compare between different types of products here. Now, as I said, since our first risk assessment, many years of research had followed from many different research groups. So the last few years, some influential reports reviewing all these studies have been published. Most notably the NASEM report in the US, but also the SCHEER opinion commissioned by the European Commission in Europe. And the SCHEER opinion followed the weight of evidence approach, and first of all note that for none of these effects was there a very high level of evidence. So one first conclusion is, even though a lot of research has been carried out, it's still not enough to make certain conclusions about these effects. But as we all know, absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. Anyway, the strongest advice here, moderate evidence, was found for irritative damage. So what we also found in our first risk assessments, and long-term effects on the cardiovascular system, and weak to moderate evidence on carcinogenicity. So yeah, that's what the sum of all the evidence available at that moment, so 2 years ago, showed regarding toxicity. SCHEER also looked at other endpoints more related to attractiveness and addictiveness. And there, in some cases, they found stronger evidence. They assessed that there was weak evidence for the support of electronic cigarettes' effectiveness in helping smokers to quit. Since then, there was some more evidence available, but still I think it would be helpful if we had more tests, more studies on this. A bit more promising was that there was weak to moderate evidence on smoking reduction, moderate evidence that electronic cigarettes are a gateway, and strong evidence that nicotine is implicated in addiction, in the development of addiction for e-cigarettes, and that flavors in e-cigarettes play an important role in the attractiveness of use and initiation. Now, this was also nicely reflected in a study we did using the model I just showed you for attractiveness, addictiveness, and toxicity. First of all, we found that regarding the product Juul, which we reviewed available literature on, not much studies were around regarding its toxicity. On the other hand, the available evidence showed that there were many aspects of concern regarding attractiveness and addictiveness. So it's attractive in discrete shape, it's user-friendly pre-filled pods, flavors, the high aerosol nicotine levels in combination with the liquid containing nicotine salts instead of free-base nicotine, which made it possible to inhale these large levels of nicotine. So potentially we assessed there was a large impact on population health. And well, the rest is history. I think many of you are aware what happened to Juul in relation to young people and regulation afterwards in the US. This is a study about the different aspects of e-cigarettes. We looked at different characteristics of e-cigarettes and how they were rated by different user groups. So we looked at non-users, smokers, dual users, and smokers. It was a small study, but it was very interesting that one of the findings was that the variety of e-liquid flavors was assessed as most attractive characteristic by all user groups. And since then we have done a lot more research on flavors, which also informed our government regarding their decision to ban flavors to ban e-liquids flavors other than tobacco. So what we already knew regarding evidence was that e-cigarettes are not safe, that they are used among smokers and increasingly used among youth, that they are probably a gateway to smoking for young people, that flavors increase the attractiveness of use and initiation, and that it's still questionable whether e-cigarettes are that effective in helping smokers to quit. So our additional work showed that there are many different types of flavors available in the Netherlands, mostly sweet and fruity. One of our studies showed that more than 200 unique flavors are available. And the last time we checked the EU Common Entry Gate, more than 30,000 e-liquids were available. And that's a lot. If you look at cigarettes, for example, only around 100 have been notified. So this is a very high magnitude of available liquids. We also found in sensory studies that both smokers and non-smokers like sweet and minty flavors better than tobacco flavors. And unfortunately, we did not find a magic flavor that was liked by smokers, whereas it was disliked by non-smokers. So all of this led our government to the conclusion that they would ban flavors other than tobacco, taking into account that their main aim is to protect youth, because this was their policy aim to reach a smoke-free generation. Other countries, of course, with different policy aims could have come to a different conclusion. At the moment, the Dutch state is in a lawsuit from different parties regarding this flavor ban. For this reason, also the sale-out period of non-tobacco flavors has been extended. Now the idea is that as of January 2024, no more liquids should be available other than tobacco. And of course, it's important to do an impact assessment. What does this mean for the primary aim that less young people will use e-cigarettes? And will it lead to more smoking? And also, I think here we can learn from history. After the menthol ban for cigarettes, we saw a rise in so-called flavor accessories. So these are products that one can use to flavor one's own tobacco product. For example, drops or capsules you can put in your filter, or flavor cards. Not everybody started to using them. Some people also stopped smoking when the menthol ban was there. But I'm just saying that people find their way around regulation, so this is probably also what we could expect for an e-cigarette flavor ban. Moving on to a different topic. Additives that facilitate inhalation or nicotine uptake. we already discussed nicotine salts, which were one example of that. The concept behind is that nicotine and other sensory irritants decrease the inhalability of tobacco and nicotine product aerosols, and that some additives counteract the harshness and bitterness of such aerosols, making them easier to inhale and lead to more intense use. Now, we carried out a review on that. That is our group together with the group from the States. And we came to 3 different classes of additives that would have such effects that facilitate inhalation. The first is TRPM8 activation. TRPM8 is a cooling receptor, and if specific additives bind to that, they will give a cooling effect. Most well known is menthol, but other additives are also on the rise, especially since the menthol ban, such as synthetic cooling agents, such as the WS compounds, the Wilkinson sort compounds. So this is one group of additives that we assessed to have inhalation facilitation activity. The second was pH lowering. Here you also find the nicotine salts, because this is the mechanism via which they work. They lower the pH or increase the acidity of the aerosol, thereby making it easier to inhale as compared to products with free base nicotine. So one class can be found in e-cigarettes, but similar additives can be found in tobacco products. There are also organic acids there that lower the pH, and sugars have the same effect. Sugars, when combusted, also give acids, so those also lower the pH. So together, this makes it easier to inhale cigarette smoke or nicotine aerosol. And finally, there's the class with olfactory and orosensory compounds. Here we found evidence for all flavorings with a sweet property and also for sugars, because on combustion that they do not only release acids, but also caramel compounds that give smoke a sweet taste. So many different ways to facilitate inhalation of aerosol. So what do you need to do with that as a regulator? Well, first of all, there's Article 9 of the Framework Convention that says that there's no justification for permitting additives that increase the attractiveness of a tobacco product. And attractiveness is described, for example, by smell and other sensory attributes and ease of use. So I think if you combine those two, that's sufficient reason to ban additives that facilitate inhalation. The European Tobacco Product Directive is more clear about it. Article 7.6 forbids many different types of additives, including additives that facilitate inhalation or nicotine uptake. So, based on this Article 7.6, our government asked us to write a report of all additives that are not allowed according to the TPD. The problem with the TPD is that even though it forbids a lot of additives, it does not give concrete examples of such additives. So each country needs to interpret that legislation by their own. So we made such a report, including, for example, TRPM8 receptor agonists. So a long list of such compounds, including menthol and all those WS compounds. We are not alone in that. For example, also Germany and Belgium have such lists. So this is a way open to regulators. Moving on to the second case, HTP products. As you know, they were put on the market as less harmful products. So we were very curious whether this was indeed the case, because at the moment of release and years after that, nobody could really answer that question. Yes, there were less toxicants present in smoke, and yes, that led to less exposure, but nobody knew whether that led to less harm. So we developed a risk assessment method. What we did was using a relative potency factor approach, where you look at compounds present in your emissions. In this case, we looked at carcinogens, and then treat them as though they were a certain reference compound. I will explain that. So if you look at your second compound, you check which level is present in your mixture. Then you look at the known response of that known from previous studies. and translate that to your reference compound and look at which dose that reference compound would have given that effect. If you do this for all your compounds, you can treat them if though they were all your reference compound and come to a certain cumulative dose of exposure. You can do that for two types of products and make a comparison. This gives you a so-called change in cumulative exposure by which you can compare two different types of tobacco products. So promising approach. But unfortunately, we could only find such dose response data in literature for 8 carcinogens, which are needed for this method. When we only used those 8, the change in cumulative exposure was 10 to 25-fold, which would mean a smaller reduction in expected lifespan if you would compare a lifetime HTP user with a lifetime smoker. This is, of course, not often a real scenario. Also, it's a preliminary conclusion because we only had 8 carcinogens, and there are many more present in the emissions of both products. And also do not forget that an unfavorable health impact remains when using HTP. So it was promising, and we wanted to know whether we could include more carcinogens, maybe also from other data sources, explore its applications to other non-cancer endpoints, and exploring other products. Unfortunately, we couldn't find the data, and in many cases also not sufficient emission data were available. So yes, it's promising, but if we want to use this, we need more data. A consumer survey is a little bit easier to carry out. We also looked at that among the general population of 13 years and older, and found that HTP at that moment were not that much ever used yet. The awareness was also not that high, and we also found that the longer products on the market, the higher their awareness and ever use is, which is not uncommon for a survey. We also asked about social environment reasons of use and risk perception, and found that most people are aware of the products through people they knew, that many people use them out of curiosity, so as we discussed in the first session of this conference, maybe an irrational reason. For the pleasant taste, the flavor variety, to reduce or quit cigarettes, and because they are lower in harmfulness. They actually scored the products, and we found that they scored them as to have a lower harm than cigarettes, even though the difference was not that large. A focus group also showed some interesting data. Here you see a quote that reflects the general sentiment quite well. It says, "I just don't find the pleasure of smoking the IQOS that pleasure you have when lighting a cigarette. But it's nice to have on the side." And this is an issue because ITC data also showed that instead of moving completely away from cigarette, many people will just exchange a few cigarettes to HTP sticks, and they exchange less cigarettes to more HTP. So at the end of the day, they use more tobacco items per day. And so in this case, that would not be an alternative maybe, but an addition. Other things we also found here is that they found that the less harmful alternatives, it gave them a healthier feel. They didn't feel to bother others. They liked the design, but they didn't like the taste. They found the price too high, and they found the charging a bother. And in this study, the flavors were not found to be that important, which was unexpected. So moving on to the third case. This is the newest product on the market, at least in the Netherlands. And not a lot is known about it yet. For those of you who maybe not be too familiar with that, it's used in a similar way as snus, but doesn't contain tobacco, but just nicotine. It's a colorful package. It's available in many different flavors, and it's advertised via social media. Here, for example, you see a famous Dutch singer, probably not so famous outside the Netherlands, but anyway, he likes to post pictures on Instagram of himself with this can of nicotine pouches. We also find in the few data that are available about prevalence of use that they're used among adult smokers, but also that past 30-day use of young non-smokers is on the rise. The numbers that have been reported are around 1%. So it's not just for smokers. As this product was not covered by the Dutch tobacco law that doesn't cover nicotine products other than e-cigarettes, we carried out a risk assessment because then, via default, it's a commodity and anywhere on the market should not have risks. So we found, looking at an acute reference dose related to increased heart rate, that for adults, consumption of just one nicotine pouch containing less than 0.035 milligrams per pouch would lead to a risk. And when you consider that nicotine pouches contain nicotine levels in the range of 2 to 33, similar to snus, you can immediately see that it's not very worthwhile as nicotine addicts to use such pouches. And we also saw a lowering of sales after that, and initially some illegal sales. Marketing teams, benefits, less harmful, no smoke, tobacco free, no smell, mild slim flavor, discreet and can be used anywhere. This was all on the websites because at the moment the products could be marketed. Packaging, colorful and appealing to youth. And social media, as I just showed an example, but also football players and influencers, are very positive about such products. Here is an overview of the risks. So attractive features are the flavors, the easy and discreet nature of use, that they're perceived as less harmful and as effective to quit. They also have high nicotine levels, which are harmful to health. For example, we saw that they affect the cardiac system. They sustain addiction, but do not give the fast kick as inhaled products do, unless you have very high levels of nicotine. And this has not been tested yet, but is a valid question. Is it a gateway product to other nicotine and tobacco products? I didn't find data about it. And also the product can undermine tobacco control policies, for example, because it can be used at places where you cannot smoke, due to its discreet nature. Then, the take-home messages of this presentation. First of all, it's important to realize that different jurisdictions differ in tobacco use prevalence and approach to these new products, for example, because they have different policy aims. Thus, there is a variety of regulatory needs and wishes around such products. The new products are marketed as alternatives for smokers, but also attract a new group of never users, and flavors are important regarding their attractiveness. Most of these products are addictive, although especially oral products do not give the fast kick as inhaled products do. And we also saw that there are additives that can facilitate inhalation and nicotine uptake, especially for novel users that are not used yet to the harsh taste of smoke and aerosols. And finally, yes, there are several approaches to quantify the health risk, either absolute or relative to a tobacco cigarette, but none of them are sufficiently developed to use in regulation, especially due to a lack of data. One last point, we talked a lot about new nicotine and tobacco products, but if there are any regulators here, please do not forget to regulate your cigarette. It's the most toxic and the most often used product. So maybe you like to give it to dissuasive of color, print a warning on this, all related to design. Forbid filter ventilation because that makes the smoke milder. Forbid all flavorings, forbid sugars, forbid any compound that facilitates inhalation. And if you're onto it anyway, also lower the nicotine levels to non-addictive levels. You can find all of that in our overview fact sheet available in English. Big thank you to my team, and for all of those that I forget to mention, these are over here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for a brilliant talk. Thank you for sharing your insights on the challenges of risk assessment. Thank you for listening. As I said, unfortunately, we don't have the time to take questions. Please approach Reinske.
Yeah,
immediately afterwards. We have now 1 hour of coffee break, so plenty of time to have discussions. Thank you very much. Enjoy the break.